Welcome to the wonderful world of wine, exploring all things wine with you. We're your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the wonderful world of wine. We're your hosts, Mark and Kim, and every week we bring you trending topics from the wine world. And how are you this week, Mark?
Everything's good, Kim. How are you?
Good, I'm fine, thank you.
It's always good to talk wine today,
absolutely.
Right? Talk something good.
Sure. So first thing that we wanted to talk about is ways that the wine industry in America can be improved. And this is the kind of thing that there are, I think, as many opinions as there are people talking about the topic. And a lot of folks have issues with our current system of either alcohol distribution or how it is sold in different states. And it is a very complicated situation because it really springs from laws that were put into place at the end of Prohibition. So we have this almost 100-year-old system that maybe isn't keeping up with modern day and modern technology. But there are other things, too, that could be maybe improved for wine drinkers and for other things like the environment.
So this was, I thought, a very interesting article. Kim, it covered a lot of things. It was the U.S. wine is a mess, and here's how to fix it. And it was a Wine Enthusiast magazine article. And it was like assuming he was the emperor of the U.S. and here's what should happen to address some of the issues. I thought it would be fun if we go through them and agree or disagree on if there are really issues here or not.
Sure.
The first one they mentioned was all wine will have ingredient labels. That would be one of the things they would change. And we talked about this a lot. What's your feeling on ingredient labels? Would you think it would overall improve the industry?
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before. And should wine have ingredient labels? Should it have calorie counts? Should it have nutritional information? I think we eventually will have that kind of thing on winery labels. And I definitely think it's going to be a bit of a transition both for producers and for consumers and for folks like yourself who are selling the wines, because it's going to be a lot of unusual information that consumers will need to be educated about. So if you just slap a whole bunch of technical winemaking ingredient terms on the back of a label right now, I think it's going to scare a lot of people. But honestly, maybe that's not a bad thing. I fully believe that being transparent and giving the consumer information is a good thing. It's just going to be, I think, a little tricky once people read what actually goes into their wines and whether those ingredients are natural or not dangerous or even have health benefits. I think that there's going to have to be a lot of education from our side so that consumers can figure out what that label actually means. So I think it needs to go beyond just listing them and telling people this is what this is all about.
Yeah, I like the point of view in two things. First, I think right now we do a lot of education and talk about, look at these labels and try to learn a few things. And people really don't take the time now to do that. So like you were saying, I think adding more to it with all these ingredients now, it's really probably going to confuse or it could scare people more away from wine. Imagine if we started putting the acidity levels and stuff like that, and we talked in the past, you see acid on something you drink and you're like, what acid? It kind of scares you away.
Yeah, or it could do the opposite. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that, as far as in the packaged food realm, that has an ingredient list that's like 30 ingredients long, and that doesn't stop people from buying it. So maybe this is something that our industry is worrying about that we have no need to worry about. I think that could also happen, that people aren't even going to care, that they're not going to turn it over. I think some people will, but I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see.
And you mentioned transparency, and I think that would be very interesting because we always talk about the big corporate wines and how they never really want to say, their secret recipes or whatever for wine. It would really be interesting what they do and how they would handle it. And if they really want to tell, or will they change because they're going to have to tell people what's in it. So that was a very interesting thing they started with. Second of all, they said all wines should be TCA free or cork taint free closures, which to me, the rate of getting a corked wine is 3 to 5%, maybe lower. And I think every year it goes down. So I don't think that's a big issue with the wines in the U.S. now. Do you still think this is a mess and that needs to be corrected?
No, I don't. I think that we as an industry have done a lot. I mean, not me, I'm not a winemaker, but we've certainly been on the side of trying to educate consumers in that it doesn't mean that the wine is not a good quality wine just because it has a screw cap. Just because a wine isn't bottled with a real cork, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with that. And I think that over the last 20, 25 years, our industry has actually done a really good job of addressing this issue, whether it's from the side of producers who are going extra lengths to make sure that they are sourcing good cork, to cork producers who are investing in a lot of research, in a lot of new technology, in paying better attention to the actual trees so that they can end up getting better quality cork. I think on many, many levels, this has been addressed. And yes, there's going to still be a little bit of this going around. Just anecdotally, I don't remember the last time I got a corked bottle, honestly.
Yeah,
and I drink a lot of wine. I taste a
less.
lot of wine, and I have not gotten a corked bottle in quite a while.
And the testing methods for the corks is every year it gets better and better and better. So they reduce the amount of cork they're putting in the bottle that's going to have the bacteria that cause the cork taints. It just keeps improving every year. So I'm glad we saw this the same way and we kind of agree. Next, again, was the way they worded this. I like this. They said the murder weapon weight bottles should be outlawed.
I knew you would like this one. As soon as I saw this one, I'm like, yep, Mark's going to get behind that one.
They're talking the real thick, heavy glass bottles that they put a little extra in and hurt the environment by making these thicker glass bottles. They should outlaw them. And I've seen a comeback, and I think we talked about this before too. I'm seeing a comeback of that real heavyweight bottle. And I always say to people when they're looking at the bottles for gifts, always go with that heavy bottle because it makes such a perfect gift, because when they pick it up, they're like, wow, I never felt glass this thick. It must be expensive, right? But, so what's your take on, should we get rid of these heavyweight bottles?
Should we get rid of them? I think producers should do the right thing and move away from them for all of the reasons that you've stated. Extra weight puts extra pressure on the environment. It takes more fuel to transport those heavier things. Glass is heavy. The majority of weight of a case of wine is not the wine itself. It's the glass bottles. But I don't necessarily feel like we can legislate, quote unquote, winemakers to not use expensive bottles, heavier bottles, because this is solely a marketing issue. And like you mentioned, folks will put their wines in this heavier bottle only to make people think that it is a more impressive and possibly, more value wine than maybe it truly is. There are some wines in heavy bottles that are like super pricey and very good quality and hard to get and all those things. But I think the idea of putting your wine in a heavy bottle just so that people will do what you said and pick it up and be like, oh, wow, this bottle's really heavy. This must be, some fancy schmancy wine. I think people should do the right thing and move away from that. But it's probably beneficial to them and their bottom line to keep bottling in heavier bottles. I would prefer to get rid of them personally.
And it will cost you more because, like you said, the weight, it leads to more expensive shipping costs. So,
and it's more glass. So, yeah. It does cost more because it physically is more massive glass there.
It does cost more. Next, Kim, alcohol levels should be more accurate. And in the United States, right, there is a 1 to 1.5% error on the wine label that you can have by law. They said it should be better than that, should be more accurate than that.
I wonder if this one goes hand in hand with the ingredient and the nutritional label, especially for some smaller producers where you might have 5 different batches of the same wine and the same vintage, and they might be slightly different. Giving them that wiggle room to just put like 13% on their label, where it could be 14, it could be 12, it could be 13 and a half. I think that's beneficial to the little guys. But where you see that this obviously is kind of being taken advantage of is I feel that there are so many wines out there that say 13.5% because like that is the sweet spot where you can get away with a lot of different levels and just put 13.5 on your bottle. So I think that this is something that is sometimes taken advantage of and could be done better.
Yeah, it does go with the ingredients because if we're going to say this is what's in there, then they should say more accurately what your alcohol content is, right? And same with sulfites. Sulfites, it says if it's over this, you say it contains sulfites, but maybe we should know if it's on the low end or the high end of that range more.
And I honestly, I would rather see the sulfite level on the bottle of wine than have it be within, 0.1% of the correct alcohol content in there. Like for me, I'm less concerned with whether my bottle of wine is 13% or 13.5%. But if it has 25 grams or micrograms, I forget what the actual amount of sulfites that's allowed in there. But if it's 25 versus 125, I feel like I'd rather know that.
Yeah, makes sense. And I saw a chart that listed all the alcohol tolerances in the world, and US, New Zealand, and Australia could be up to that 1.5. Every place else was with like 0.5 to 1.
Okay.
And more accurate than 3.
But only slightly more accurate.
Yeah. But
so not like it has to be 100%.
Yeah, but a lot lower than that 1.5% it could be off, which it makes a big difference. The next one they were saying, Kim, which is kind of a mess and should be corrected, was the proposed agricultural areas that are designated should be approved based on the wines being very distinctive, not that it's just a unique spot.
Right.
Is the way I was reading that. So just this week there were 2 Washington AVAs that were approved, and one of them was called the Burn. And prior to this announcement of being approved, Chateau Ste. Michelle came out with a wine called the Burn, and it was based on they're the only wine in this area that makes a winery, and they got approved based on its being this one spot. So they're saying they don't even look at anything to do with wine or like in the EU, it's a history or something like that. You basically can put it in. If you push enough, you're getting approved for these designated areas. So what was your take on that, Kim?
So did they get is this an AVA that has one producer?
Correct. And I think that's the whole point of this, that's saying it's a mess and it should be corrected.
Yeah.
And you've seen more and more of that, where every once in a while there are certain things in the EU where there's certain things that is such a cult following or something that they finally get an approved DOC or something like that. But it's very rare. In the United States, it seems it's just getting more and more approved for things that aren't really proven. Because this Burn, this was a new line. It just came out last year. So how do they know this AVA is unique?
Yeah. And I think that that's what it comes down to is that how do you know? And is that the whole purpose behind an AVA? Should it be the uniqueness of the site? And I think that this is one thing that as we look to European countries who have been making wine for many, many, many hundreds, if not thousands of years, and have recently in the last 200 years, been designating those areas as, okay, this particular place is special. Therefore, you can only call this wine if it's from this particular place. And American wines still are so new that it's almost like we're going through this weird, like, growing pains where partly we want to be like those European wines and have this system where we have all these tiny little ones and they all have something unique and special about them. And they're going to be levels of quality that are all sort of nested one within the other. And then on the other hand, we have this sort of like to hell with it kind of American mentality of I want to grow this and I want to grow it here. And you can't tell me that I can't. So it's this weird, like trying to have it both ways, I feel like. And it's only, I mean, it's confusing when you're dealing with European wines, even though there's lots and lots of history behind why there are regions and subregions and then, specific villages within them. And, as we learn those things, it's like, it's very confusing and it's overwhelming, but at least there is a reason behind why there are so many of these tiny little areas. But in America, we don't really have that reason. Like right now, it's kind of like you said, where it's like, well, one person wants to put their stamp on this particular region and so create an AVA. But why? Why, beyond just we want to sell more wine with our own unique label on it. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for the creation of a new AVA. There's no set of rules saying this is the unique character that your wine needs to demonstrate from this particular place.
That's really what they were saying. The wine should really stand out. Why is it different? All right, you grown Cabernet there, but why is it different than the Cabernet grown next to you in the other? Why?
And I think that if there's more and more and more of this, of producers either gunning for their own unique AVAs or all of these smaller ones being created, it definitely makes it more difficult for the consumer.
You're just seeing, we always suggest people look for the smaller circle location. So if you see an AVA, right, that should mean it's better. But, this is really going the opposite of that advice, saying, well, we don't really know because it's brand new.
It's brand new. Yeah.
So
and then sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's really big or really small or really anything at all. Like it's a harder thing to teach people, especially with some of these newer ones.
And last, Kim, they mentioned, and I hope I'm sure we agree on this, but they say reserve be a more meaningful term. So right now it's a mess, the reserve scene. We said it many times that you see reserve on a U.S. wine, it means absolutely nothing. It's not regulated. A lot of times the winemakers, a true winemaker, will use the term for their reserve or special wine, but it's not a regulated term. So I agree that this is something that should be corrected. It should be a meaningful term. Put some sort of number or something that's regulated to it. And I would think it'd be easy.
Who would regulate that? Like who's the regulating body that
the TTB who regulates who regulates the labels when you submit a wine.
Yeah.
If you say it's reserve on it, then they should say, okay, then what's it mean? Does it mean it's limited to 10,000 cases, or it's you don't make this every year, or what does that mean? They can easily put a term to it and regulate it, but for some reason no one wants to touch it because I think it again goes back to marketing and misleading people to purchase a wine.
Yeah. So do you think that it would be beneficial for, like, what kind of rules would you like to see behind the word reserve? Would you like it to be production based? Like you can't make more than a certain number of cases of this particular wine? Or would you think it would be more beneficial if, going back to our previous question, if this wine came from a more specialized, specific site? Or is it winemaking related? So I guess that's kind of my question to you. Would you rather see it as the grape growing, or would you rather see it as the winemaking?
Yeah, I'm thinking more production, limiting the volume. It would be tough to say aging, which is the EU type of thing, but it could be a combination of both. It's aging, reds must be aged this long, whites this long, plus the production must be under so much, because that would help the real small producers a lot more, and then limit these big corporations from saying reserve on things that they're making 2 million cases on.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would lean more towards have it be designating specific winemaking practices. So, I mean, I don't necessarily feel like
Which would be aging, right?
Which would be aging, but
yeah.
I don't necessarily know if American wines, a lot of ours aren't really meant for aging.
Right.
So
percentage of grape type of thing.
I don't know. I think that there are
which is already
different
regulated.
variables, but I do feel like the limited production is what people imagine when they see or hear the word reserve, that, oh, this is more of a special production, and what that specialness implies might be different from person to person. But I think going along with it is kind of a limited availability. Definitely not 2 million cases. Like that's a lot of wine.
And I find when you talk to a winemaker and they say barrel select or reserve, say they're making Cabernet, all the Cabernet is aged in oak. They'll go through and they'll say, oh, wait, this barrel tastes different than this one. This one is way better. So that's my reserve barrel, right? So they're actually saying, the winemaker saying, this is my better thing, but it's all was the same grapes and the same way it was made. It's just aged in a different barrel. So it'd be tough to have the winemaker. I think what the winemaker will say reserve and what the consumer is going to say reserve is going to be totally different. That's kind of where I was getting with that. But I think it should definitely could easily be regulated, but who's going to do that? And you know it's never going to happen.
And I don't think that there is necessarily the demand for those kind of changes right now, so at least just for that last one, that word reserve. But I think that there are other things that we probably will see some of these changes be implemented in at least the next few years, probably more along the lines of the labeling.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. If you'd like more information about Kim, please go to her website at vinitaswineworks.com. If you'd like more information about myself, please go to franklinliquors.com. And for past episodes, you can find us on iTunes or SoundCloud. Next, we have a story from Wine Searcher. It was actually a news story that was all over the place because there was some controversy down in South Carolina about Gallo wanting to build a huge new East Coast plant for production. And they also wanted to open up some retail locations. So it drew a lot of controversy down in South Carolina, Kim. So what was your thoughts on this? Do you like the idea or the idea?
This is sort of playing with the idea of monopolies. And what Gallo was trying to do was, because they have such a large share of the market in South Carolina, they have a large share of the market everywhere because their wine label, and it's not just a wine that you see the name Gallo on, they own lots and lots and lots of other wine brands that if you take a look at the label, either the front label or the back label, you would really have no idea that Gallo actually owns this brand. So
40% market share in the United States.
Is that in the United States
in the
overall?
US, 40% of the market is.
That's what that about has 40% of the market share in wine in South Carolina, and that they were really sort of strong-arming the distributors to go with whatever decision they wanted to make so that they could really kind of come in and move on in and continue to grow their business and their market share in the state of South Carolina. So for me, this feels like kind of not fair. It's like one of the really, really big wine stores, whose name I won't mention, but maybe I should, kind of making it public that what they want to do is kind of drive all the little guys out of business. This is another way of trying to drive all the little guys out of business, because if Gallo were to have, say, their own store or, their own tasting room and their own facility, then they can really dictate kind of what's going on in the wine market in that state.
Right. And South Carolina is a state-controlled liquor state like New Hampshire. And they're talking about Gallo wants to build a plant, so they're going to produce and make wine, and then they want to open up what they're going to call tasting rooms, 4 tasting rooms in the state. And their tasting room is basically going to be a store to sell their wine. So
they're calling it a tasting room, but it's really a retail store.
A retail store. And when this came up, they say, well, it's got to go to the state for approval. So let's have a hearing. And then only one distributor in the state showed up to protest. Now, if you think about it, if you're a distributor in that state, you're probably selling a Gallo product.
Yeah.
So you're not going to show up and protest it because they're going to shut you off. It's bad enough you're going to have to compete with them when they come to the state. But if you're not going to be able to sell it to everybody else in the state, I mean, if you went and protested it and you were selling the product, you wouldn't be selling that product much anymore. So the other issue they had with the people in the state is now you're going to have these stores competing and they're going to sell their own product. Number one, you got a problem with that. Number two issue is they're going to make wine. And the state law in South Carolina says in order to say you're making it, it had to be say it's produced and bottled in the state. Now, they're not going to be growing the grapes. So I thought this was interesting, Tim, because you can truck grapes into this plant and bottle it there and say it's produced and bottled there because you're going to make it, but you have to make it there. You have to ferment it there. So I don't know how they're going to get around that part of the law.
Yeah.
It might be adapted because they're changing all sorts of laws to get them in there. So I mean, that point was going to be interesting. It's going to be the other thing they were saying why it should happen. Gallo was saying is because the stores have to close by law at like 5:30, and all the smaller stores around us saying, well, it doesn't matter. By 5:30, you already put us out of business if you're selling the wine, right?
Especially since, I mean, a lot of retail traffic comes on weekends, right?
Yeah, and even the state wasn't concerned that the smaller people were trying to say this is a threat to the state. It's a direct competition. They'll be bigger than the state in selling their own wine. And I guess the state didn't care because it officially got approved. And it's going to be a plant that's going to be like in 600 acres. It's going to take 8 years to build, I believe. And it's in a town. I don't know. Did you see that stat, Tim? There was something about the town only had like 400 people or something. It was really small.
It's a tiny little place.
Yeah.
And they probably made the argument of, hey, we're going to be bringing all these jobs into the area. Yeah.
They can hire everybody in the town.
And they probably can.
And then they set limits for the retail store that you could only buy 2 cases per person per month.
That's still a heck of a lot of wine.
Yeah. So the small people say, okay, wait a minute. If every resident goes to a Gallo store and buys 2 cases, they're never going to come to us. What do they need?
No,
more?
I mean, and that's a ridiculous amount of wine. Like 2 cases a month. I drink a lot of wine and I don't even drink that much. That's a lot.
2 of us together, we probably don't.
Maybe, but I'm going to say probably not. But
let's look at it from Gallo's point of view. Right now, all their big bottling plants is on the West Coast, California, and they have to ship half of it across to us on the East Coast. So
I think it's a brilliant idea from their perspective. I think
that this is a ton.
I think this is absolutely brilliant, clever business because it's like win, 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 and there's like no way to lose. I mean, So all they do is piss off a bunch of retailers and distributors. They honestly don't necessarily need those people. And in situations like this, when you're talking about the relationship between the distributors and the wholesalers, sometimes the distributor is the one who is in more of a position of power than the actual producer is, especially when the producer is a little guy and their only option, their only way of getting their wines into the state is to make nice with whoever their distributor is. But then you've got the flip side of this, where when these big brands and these big companies have so much power and have so much influence, then they really are the ones calling the shots. And this seems to me to be one of those situations where Gallo can really throw their weight around because they can.
Yeah, and I found that the town population kid was 940 people.
Oh, well, that's double what you thought.
Yeah, it's going to create hundreds of new jobs for these 940 people. And they also changed one of the South Carolina laws to allow satellite locations just for these people to build their plant there. So I think once it's built and they're shipping, it's going to be interesting to look like you look at a bottle of Barefoot or something if it says, bottled in South Carolina instead of. It'd be interesting to see what products they're going to focus East Coast, what products West Coast, or maybe they'll just create certain brands only for East Coast. They had
Yeah,
so many
who knows?
options they could do. But
And
by that time, there'd
and
be a
it's
new
not like
trend.
they're stopping accumulating all of these labels. So I mean, they just continue to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah. And by the time this is done, the trend in the wine might be something totally different that's
Yeah.
only made there by then. Who knows if it's
Mm.
going to be cans or what? So just, let people know there's something going on out there in the wine world with Big
Yep.
Guy and how it affects everybody.
Yep.
And
And
then
I
it was
just
going to
saw
cost them
that
$400 million to build it, they said.
And I just saw that in a related article, Gallo has purchased one of my, I hesitate to say favorite wine brands because I don't drink it all that much anymore, but it was the New Zealand wine brand that got me into New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So it's sort of near and dear to my heart. So Nobilo. So they just purchased Nobilo a couple months ago.
Well, was that a Constellation brand that they took over?
Yeah, it was one of the ones that they took.
So Gallo and Constellation are pretty much one and two in the wine world.
And they have been doing
bought
this
half
thing
of
where
that.
they just like trade brands back and forth, don't they?
Yeah, and Gallo just bought a ton of the Constellation brands, so they just became bigger. I would say that 40% is probably over 50% now.
Yeah, and I mean this isn't old news. This is only a few weeks old, so
No, it's always changing.
There's always something going on. Thank you for listening to us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lindsay. You can always find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine, where we highlight some of the articles that we will be discussing. And you can find past episodes on SoundCloud or iTunes. Cheers.
Wine.